Hello and welcome to the Pages to Pixels podcast, where we talk about new movies and, in this case, a TV show every week. I'm Rohan, and today we have a special guest named Drew.
Hey
He
guys.
is a he's a screenwriter and actor, and pretty good friend of mine. And today we're talking about Severance. It's a new Apple TV show. Actually, apparently their number one show in Apple TV history, dethroning Ted Lasso recently.
Oh, really?
Uh,
That's great.
yeah. And it's basically a show about where people, when they walk into work, they lose their memories of the outside world. When they walk out of work, they lose their memories of inside of work. And it effectively creates like two separate people. They're innie and they're outie. And season one came out, and it was huge. It was extremely critically acclaimed. Um, it's also a season that I really, really love. And we are going full spoilers both in season one and season two.
Hmm.
Um, and I say that because I think it has maybe the best reveal I've ever seen on TV. When I'm simply talking about when you learn that Miss Casey is Mark's wife, who you thought was dead.
Right.
Um, yeah, what do you think about season one, actually, before we jump into two?
Sure. I mean, I love season one. Yeah, it was probably my favorite show the year that it came out, and then it was such a long hiatus between season one and two. I was able to go back and rewatch it all in one sitting, which
Hmm.
was really fun and like made me like it even more because of all the things they plant and the
Yeah.
different ways they clearly have something thought out that they're building towards. And yeah, that reveal at the end is so shocking and such a good cliffhanger to then leave you on for like a couple of years before coming back with season two.
But yeah.
Yeah, and then just like I think the show, like especially in season one, sets up such a unique like visual world too, and like its own type of visual language with like how cold everything is and how just
Yeah.
gray and white and like this interpretation of modern American office culture to its most evil extent, and that's something I think that really captured viewers and still does. They make good use of that.
Yeah, you mentioned the world that it creates, and I think it's very interesting because I never thought that you could make like an empty office space with like three cubicles in the center visually interesting,
Mm,
and they pull it off somehow.
yeah, they do. They do. It's interesting because that's sort of the journey that like the innies go on is similar to what the audience goes on. Is like, oh, this sucks. Like, who would want to, And then like
Yeah.
they end up by the end of season two. It's like you give someone a life, they're gonna fight for it. I think Kelly has a line that's something like that, and um, just I think to anyone who's ever been unemployed or anyone like looking for a job or like and then stuck in a job you hate, that idea that like of even that is worth fighting for. That really struck me, and I think that's in that. So like what you're talking about, Rohan,
Yeah.
like you never expect like to fall so madly in love with these characters who are not quote unquote real, fully realized human beings, or like these places that seem to be like but that place is home to them. That place is everything, and you really learn to like connect to it in a way that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think one of the moments that really stood out to me is when they're talking about I don't even know if my Audi got a good night of sleep. And I think Mark
Mm-hmm.
says I try to focus on the impacts of sleep to determine that
Right.
because I don't
Right.
actually remember that.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great moment in season one. Yeah, because it's cool. Like such a simple concept of like imagine if you could split your brain to so that you didn't have
Yeah.
to go to work, someone else did. Seems like they found this really interesting, so many different ways to explore ways, fascinating experiences of what that would actually be like
Hmm.
in ways that I never expected. You think that's just like that's a funny idea, but in moments like that when you're like, oh, these people don't get to sleep, they don't get to eat, they don't really get to have love or all these things. And humans, even if you give them just the tiniest little bit of time in
Yeah.
life, they want that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause it's very, and I love that the show delved into that because I think most people, if if they were to ask like, hey, would you like if you could have a job where you walk in and then you walk out and your entire lives are separate, like would you do that? And I think a lot of people would say yes.
Yeah.
And then this show kind of explores what are the consequences of
Mm-hmm.
actually saying yes to something like that, or
Yeah.
yeah, doing something like that as a corporation even.
Right. It really like it gets a lot of different themes, but I think that idea of like compartmentalization and mental health and like how it's ultimately negative to do that for your life. Being human is about
Hmm.
experiencing everything, even the bad. Um, and like especially in season two, if you want to start talking about season two a little bit, like the way they explored that with the Gemma character who and like all the different rooms she had to go in, the different
Yeah,
experiences, like, oh, if we could sever so that only whenever you go to the dentist you don't have to experience the dentist, only this version of you does, but then you're creating a whole life of a person whose only existence is going to the
the
dentist.
dentist.
Yeah, and that really struck me, like, but then even there's so many layers of that too that I found fascinating with the different workers at Lumen and all of the different like ways they're committed to this idea and the connections they have to the innies. Like when in the finale when they leave and the doctor, I call him a doctor, the scientist, whatever, the person who's
Yeah.
like he chases after them and he's like, "You'll kill them all." Like he's right. Like her leaving will kill all the other lives. Those people, quote unquote, will cease to exist. Um, and I thought that was really cool that the finale brought that debate to a head, especially between Mark and
Oh yeah.
himself. Like so that
Hmm.
that scene was so cool, and that idea of like I
Yeah.
even as a viewer, I think it was really interesting to the whole time be rooting for Mark, and then sort of for me at least have this
Which one?
moment exactly have this moment at the end where I was just like, oh, I thought this was easy. I'm rooting for Mark. Oh, but wait, I can't have both. There can't
Yeah.
you like, which is the exact journey Mark goes on throughout the season as he tries to reintegrate and then decides not to, and now it's gonna be really interesting to see where they go from here.
Hmm. And I think the any version, well, I guess we'll call him Mark S,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they refer to him as a work
Right.
or at work. He even says like, "Why would you reintegrate?" or
Right.
something like that. Like it's
Yeah.
bullshit, and it's like yeah, because I mean, if I'm outing Mark and I get Gemma back, I don't care about reintegration.
Yeah.
It's such a big risk. Why would I put myself through that risk?
Yeah.
And
It's such a cool way of exploring this idea of like autonomy, especially in like the American workforce, and like you know what happens when we start to create distance from ourselves and the companies we work for or the work that we do, and like whether that be like if even if it's not like a moral stance against what your company does, just like the idea that like we all go to work and we return home and we try to keep a distance between that work life balance is the where like the whole show is built on this idea and this sense that like you know it was easy for us as an audience for a while to be like, okay, that's the real Mark, and this is any Mark, and but eventually your work self is its own being, its own personality, its own attachments. It has its own, and in this situation, it's completely its own person. So I just found like to explore such a simple, seemingly harmless concept of work-life balance, which is a good thing to have in real life. Um,
yeah,
but you can't do that in a way that actually creates a divide between those two people. You're still the same person who goes into work, and that's sort of an indictment on like anyone who works for any company who has and there's no one who's innocent in that. Like in America, especially like when you think about like big corporations like Amazon, Apple. I think part of the greatest
yeah,
irony of the show is that it takes place on Apple, which is a streaming technology giant, and there's
yeah,
no way that you can really separate the creating of the show and the corporation, who Tim Cook, people who are like showing up and supporting billionaires and, you know,
hmm
responsible for the destruction of the world and climate change, all these things. Like it's all together. And if we try to separate ourselves from them, it's to our own detriment. And I think that's like such a great irony that I don't even know if the show is aware that it does. But
yeah,
I, as a viewer, think I find myself feeling that and thinking about that when I watch it.
yeah. I think it's kind of the same as look. It's kind of the same feeling I get while watching The Boys,
Yeah, yeah,
where where it is a show about like politics and corruption, and especially later seasons um, have been making. I don't want to say the target because I actually like what they're doing. Like have been like making poking fun at like at Trump and just the whole MAGA movement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, while being while being funded and made by Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
which uh, you know, the CEO killed a story endorsing Kamala Harris. Not to get, I know
Yeah,
I'm
no,
getting a
but
little political, but
yeah,
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 it
you're
is
right.
that
Yeah.
irony.
I mean, even the sense that like the show takes down billionaires and Bezos is a billionaire and Bezos shows is at Trump's inauguration, and it's like meanwhile the boys is making fun of someone like Trump. It's hard to separate the two. And I think with Severance, especially, that seems to be it's going to be really interesting to see. Maybe this can help us talk even more about season 2 and then like the show and as a whole where we see it going, because I think it's going to be
Yeah.
fascinating to see where they go in future seasons. Like this idea of like you know season 2 kind of ends on this triumphant note of like the innies overthrowing and like the people who are in charge of them are defeated, but at the end of the day there's someone bigger still in charge and they're a small cog in a really large machine. What is that going to look like in future seasons? How are we going to root for the innies? Because at the same time as the innies exist, the outies we've come to love don't exist. And it's going to be interesting to see, like where is Irv going? Like there's so many questions,
Yeah.
which is part of what I love about the show, and we can get into that later. But yeah, if you want to respond to that, but yeah,
No, I think we can get into it now because um, Irving is a character that um, I mean, I really, really loved his story or his subplot in season one when he I can't remember the name of the Christopher Walken character, but when
Bert.
he Bert,
Yes.
yeah, when the two of them kind of have a romance for each other, and we continue on a little bit, but I think season two really explores his outie
Yeah.
more. Of course, he does get fired
Right.
for realizing that Helly and Helena, or that when Helly returned, it was actually Helena,
Mm-hmm.
not Helly.
Yeah.
And he even figures out who she is, effectively.
Right.
Um, which awesome episode.
Yeah. That was a great episode. My
Yeah.
favorites. Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting to see like that. That to me brings up an interesting thing that we were just talking about too. Like brings it back to this whole idea of like, can you actually separate the two people? Or are they how separate are they? Are they one and the same? Because like felt to me that very much what they're showing us there is that the Irving that's on the outside and the Irving that's on the inside are both, you know, sharing one consciousness at the same like a
mhm.
little bit, that they're able to figure this out, or at the very least, the Irving on the outside was able to communicate with his innie in a certain way by like the
Yeah,
paintings and they were able to unite on one common idea, which Mark and his innie were not able to do by the end, and that's kind of interesting.
yeah. hmm And what I found interesting is when you ask, can you separate them? I feel that Bert's partner was able to separate them,
Mm,
because he realized that Bert had an affair, if you want to call it that, with
mm,
Irving, but it was a completely different guy. So for him,
right.
it didn't matter. It actually mirrors the Mark, Gemma, and Helly
It's true.
love triangle, if you want
Yeah.
to call it that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting too because like that whole storyline, um, just because they're older and they've been at Lumen longer, that like speaks to this even greater question with like you're talking once again about like the American workforce and like people who um and we can actually talk a little bit. One of my favorite episodes talks about this a lot. Like people who grow up in with a certain belief or with a certain thing in mind, um, and have to stick to that and don't find wiggle room. Like the Harmony episode was one of my favorites this year. The one where she returns to her hometown. We find out
Right.
she was basically the person who invented Severance. um, you know, and that just sort of the whole scope of Lumen being a cult, um,
Yeah.
like and
See,
yeah, no
mhm,
better terms, but yeah.
yeah. See, that is, I think, where we disagree
Mm,
because I was not big on the Harmony Cobell episode.
interesting. Why not?
Um, it just and it just felt a little bit fillery to me. I would have preferred if we stuck with the main plot line of Mark and everything that's going on with him.
Mm,
Maybe that could have been maybe that could have been part of an episode instead of a whole episode. I felt like season two did this, like they had a whole episode about Gemma.
right.
I think it was a good episode. It just it did really break from what I felt was the narrative of modern of like what's going on at Lumen currently, and I
Yeah.
think that is kind of why I come to watch the show. That's why
Hmm.
I think the show comes out Thursday nights. I always watch it Friday morning, so that's why Friday mornings. That's why I'm excited. It's like okay, it's Severance Friday.
Mm.
Um, and then whenever I would get episodes like that, I'm like, okay,
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the show I think is unique in that sense, especially season two, and that like you said, full episodes dedicated to one storyline. You could
yeah,
say that about the retreat. You could say that about the Harmony episode. You could say that about the Gemma episode.
mhm,
You could even say that about the finale, where it's like one big mission.
right,
Like they, but I think part of the achievement of the show to me is their ability to do that in a way that strings all together. That you still like that creates one cohesive season storyline, like that sort of modern, the days of
oh
streaming and
yeah,
premium, television. It's like we're designing a whole season here. And at least what I appreciate is that like they have answers and they're keeping you intrigued with questions. Um, like for other shows like that, in past TV history with like sci-fi like mystery shows, it's always like, okay, did they really know the answer to what season six was going to be when they started season one? And with something like
mhm,
Severance, you start to feel like they do, and like that's why I enjoy those sort of like bottle episodes, for lack of a better term, because it's sort of, like I feel comfortable in the hands of the writers that I'm like, oh, you have your story you want to tell here that needs to be on its own, and if you were to like take me out of the Harmony story to go back to the office, like in that episode, I would feel like I would just feel like a little off put by that.
yeah, yeah. I do. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I don't know if the alternative, which is, hey, break it up into multiple episodes, and we have parts parts where we go
Hmm.
back to, hey, like what's she doing, and
Right.
we got a couple scenes every episode. I don't know if that's the answer either. Um, Again, it just for me, it did feel like okay, a completely different thing, and I'm usually not a fan of when TV shows do that. I know Mythic
Hmm.
Quest, another Apple show, interestingly, had an episode like that where they followed a character who is one of the smaller characters in the show, and they did a whole episode about him. And I felt that was one of the episodes where I'm like, "Ah, okay, I didn't really care much for."
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I love when shows do that. Honestly, like I did, yeah, because I think like, especially in, yeah, you have like a whole ensemble of characters, and a lot of them are going to be smaller, and I think it can be really disappointing to me when like these small characters sort of like get forgotten about. They don't get to be as fleshed out as the big ones, and when you have
Right.
the scope of a whole TV show, you have the ability to really dive into these smaller moments. Um, and Harmony especially is the type of character that like started one way and she's had such a huge change, and I still have so many
Yeah.
questions about her and things to learn. Um, the question for me is always going to be like, how does that tie back to the greater, story they're telling? Like her connection to Lumen, her creation of Severance, what her goals are. Um, because we still don't really fully understand or know like the true evil like like desires of Lumen. We still don't quite know
Right.
what they're going for. um, and I think and hope that like she is a part of telling that part of the story as the greater antagonist issue. But I think it's like an interesting balance too, because at the same time you have my favorite character, Milchek, and on that same like
Milchick
antagonist
was,
side, who you don't have to maybe do like a bottle episode to explain his
yeah,
backstory, because within the show itself, you're giving me enough growth
uh-huh,
arc, fun stuff for him
yeah,
to do. Like I wouldn't be surprised if down the line they had some sort of Milchek episode that showed where he goes at the end of the day, or how he came to be at Lumen. But I think it's interesting to see how that character works so well without that. Yeah.
yeah. I do want to talk about Milchick
Yeah.
because I think he was the best written character this
Yeah.
season.
Totally.
But but before we do that, kind of talking about episodes where they focus on characters. Have you watched Creature Commandos?
Yeah, I love Creature Commandos. That whole show does
Yeah,
that every episode.
and I think it worked very well for me in that show because
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of the structure. It's this episode we're gonna focus on this character, but we're also gonna
Yeah.
continue with the
It's within this
overarching
one. Yeah. Totally.
story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe if they did a little bit of an approach like that, I
Mm.
would have bumped less for me. Though I do think at a certain point, um, it does come down to personal preference.
Yeah.
And I also wonder, like, if this was on Netflix, where the entire season is dropped in one day and it's kind
Right.
of a binge, I I don't know if I would have minded because it's like, okay, that episode happens,
Sure.
cool, moving on. I think where I was a little like annoyed is just like they would end at this awesome cliffhanger, and you're like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? And I'm here waiting a week, and then it turns out I
I
have to
get
wait
that.
2 weeks.
That's a fair point I hadn't considered.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, you wait a week to see all your favorite characters, and then you have to wait another week.
right.
And like, that brings up just an interesting like greater debate of like, does form dictate content type of thing, where it's like maybe like you're right, maybe that would be enjoyable um, on a streaming platform like Netflix where you drop it all at once. And also something with like Creature Commandos is interesting. You bring that up because it's like it has the storyline where like they're a team all working on one big goal that they weave that through, and they don't like. I think it would be out of like they're able to tell those individual stories through like flashbacks throughout. And I think if Severance did something like that, it would feel a little kitsch. It would feel a little bit like not in the style of the show. You know, if
Yeah.
they were telling a whole story and then
Hmm.
all of a sudden like Harmony flashbacked to like where she came from, that would be I'd be like, what? That's not what Severance does.
Right.
And even when they did do that, like with the Gemma episode, that was like its own thing. You know, um, it was very different and very Severance-y in its way of doing it. But I see what you're saying with that.
Hmm. But you did mention Milchek,
Yeah.
and I do want to talk about him because the reason why I think he is the most impressive character. He's not my favorite character. It's hard for me to choose,
Mm.
honestly, but I think he is the best written character. And the reason why I say that is because it's you both hate him,
Mm.
but you feel for him at the same time.
Yeah, I wonder
Where
how much do you think? Sorry to interrupt you. Like how much do you think of that as the writing versus the acting? And I think there's a fair argument that it's both going hand in hand. But I find
yeah,
that actor to be so compelling, and he makes sometimes the character lovable. You know?
yeah, I think I think it's a bit of both. I do think that uh the actor is bringing a lot to that character. But I think if the character wasn't written the way he was, I don't know if the actor would have been able to bring that level. And the reason why I say you love him and hate him is just look at how the other characters treat him.
Mm.
When upper management is mean to him, you're you feel really bad for the guy,
Yeah.
and you hate it. And I love when he told the guy devour feculence
Yeah.
for using big words and all that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And but then when the people of MBR like Mark, Helly, Dylan are mean to Milchick, you're like you're cheering them on.
That's so true. It's a really interesting like examination of just like power dynamics, punching up, punching down.
Yeah.
That whole idea, like we're
Yep.
always rooting for Milchick when he's in the room with anybody who's above him, and we're always rooting. Like at the end when he comes out of the bathroom and like fuck you, Mr. Milchick, and they're all like the band is staring and looking at him, which I love.
Yeah.
Choreography and merriment. That whole scene was
Oh
amazing.
God. Yeah.
They have to have Milchick dance in every season. Like now that has to be a thing. Because it's iconic. But yeah, it's like in that moment I was like, yeah, fuck you, Mr. Milchick. Even though only like 30 minutes earlier I was like, fuck yeah, Mr. Milchick. It's just like
Yeah.
it's just funny.
Even
It's
within
really
that
good writing.
scene,
That's true. Yeah.
when he talks shit to Kier's animatronic, um, you're
Yeah.
like, yes.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
yeah, and
Yeah.
literally
Yeah. Like
later, like you said,
we're
you're
root.
cheering against him.
Yeah. It's sort of like again another great example of how the show puts the audience in the world, where it's like I can separate like I'm on Milchick's side within the world of Lumen, but outside of the world of Lumen, for like the greater effect that he has on the other people and within the world, Milchick's a bad guy. I don't root for Milchick. I'm scared of him. But I think that's also what makes him such a compelling character, acting wise, is that actor plays him with such a unique intensity and the way he's written marries with that so well because it's such a good. I said this when I was watching it. I forget the exact wording, but like the like whole smiley corporate happiness HR guy, like that is
Yeah.
so like everybody knows anybody's worked in an office has experienced that type of person who is just like will smile in your face and tell you you're getting you're getting there are budget cuts and you're not going to get your Christmas bonus or whatever it is like to push that to this extreme is so compelling. um I love that you know
Hmm. Yeah. And I also want to talk about Dylan
Mm,
in this season because this is a character that, or at least his plot line, I've seen a lot of like let's just say mixed opinions
hmm,
on this character.
interesting.
Personally, I actually like him. I continue to like him,
Yeah.
and I think his plot line is interesting. But I know a lot of people did not feel this way.
Huh. I found it very moving, honestly.
Yeah,
Like, especially, I was really moved by the end, the way that I think I would have maybe felt differently if they hadn't ended it the way that they did in this way of, like, the Audi Dylan saying, like, I wish that she saw in me what she sees in you. Like, sort of this admission, like, this, oh my God, like, seeing that made me just so sad at the idea that there could be a version of me who's perfect if it was just like born in an office setting, like
right.
like and like something about life had driven this man down into a bad version of himself, but that didn't. But like, how can he really separate himself from the version that's inside? It's still him. They share one body, so like there must be a part of him that is still good, that is still sweet, that is still loving, and it's interesting because Dylan has always been the more abrasive one, or the more like tells dirty jokes, and you know,
Yeah.
but like uh, you wonder what parts of Audi personality are Dylan, the Dylan that we get to know, and then because the Audi Dylan we do get to know is it's not like he's horrible, but he's not great. He's mean to his wife. He's he's
Hmm.
but honestly that's it. He's with the kids. He loves his kids. Like he's not like a bad person, but he
Yeah.
clearly can't do anything else. Like I think it's also what touched me about that moment at that idea of like where like that scene where he tried to get another job and he couldn't. It's like this is his only option. Because people have stigmas against people who are severed, or like because he doesn't have other skills and doesn't have a great resume. Like,
Well, he has no experience
yeah,
because can you really put that down as
right,
experience if you're not gonna remember
yeah,
any of it?
totally. Yeah, once you make that choice, you're stuck there until you retire. Like, and you gotta you just and you're putting all your hope in the fact that your Annie does a good job and doesn't get fired, and you can't know that. Because you're not living that experience, not living that life. All of that made me enjoy it. Like I don't know what were people not liking about it.
From what I heard, people were just finding him very, very, very annoying. And actually, this does bring up something I wanted to talk about, which is the difference, which what I felt is the main difference season one and season two, is I think season one was almost entirely about the way corporations control their people,
Mm.
versus I think season two actually brings up a lot more philosophical questions. And the reason I related to Dylan is because of when I mean, you mentioned that he is mean to his wife, and the reason why he's being mean is because he believes that his wife cheated on him.
Right.
Um,
Mm.
Now she cheats on him with him, just the version of him that's at work. And I know a lot of people were very, very upset at his reaction.
Really
Um,
interesting.
but I know some people were very understanding of his reaction. I think, and it is interesting because it brings up all of these questions that are almost philosophical in nature. Um, even like I mean, I've asked a couple of my friends who haven't watched Severance. I've just kind of been like, hey, hypothetical situation. What if? And I kind of lay out a situation with like Mark, because well, Mark, any Mark knows about his wife, but is still pursuing Helly, and I'm like, is that cheating?
Mm.
Um, and even with Dylan, I'm like, and his wife, I'm like, is that cheating? And it's fun to watch my friends uh debate about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, so it's funny. Like to me, the moment he's meanest to his wife is actually earlier in the season when he doesn't get the job at the interview, and he's in the car, and she calls, and he's like, "If I had good news, I would have called you." And he like sort of like yells at her, and then like
Right.
his reaction to the cheating to me, it was mean, and like I don't think I would react the same way necessarily because I'd be like, "Oh, that is still me, I guess."
Yeah.
But like at the same time, it's not. And I think the show, like, you're right, like season two is very much about that philosophical question of like identity and autonomy and like who am I? Am I? Can I be two different people? And I think ultimately the show's answer to that question in the final moments of season two is no. Like, you can't be two. Like, I mean, you know, you are not one person. Like they
Oh
are
yeah.
different
Okay.
people. Like it seems to be
Yeah.
like what the show is saying, and like you know, and like you are meant for this thing, and this is meant for this thing. Like it's so I found that debate is interesting about like his response, but I didn't find his response to be annoying. I was like, I actually felt. I agree. It was like a similar debate watching it with my fiance, just being like, "Yeah, I think I would be upset, I guess, because especially with the way she
Hmm.
talks about it, being like he was all these things that like you used to be, and like um, I think in their particular situation, it might actually be an opportunity to sort of like mend the relationship, but like he doesn't seem to be approaching it
Yeah.
that way. Um, I think it was crazy for Lumen to even let Dylan see his Audi's wife. That was a
Yeah, that
bold
was actually
move.
kind of insane.
Um, but like I think, I mean everything they do with the Innies backfires, but yeah, I didn't
Right.
find I. That's also just like I don't know. People found that annoying. I think that's just like that's Dylan's character. Like that is sort of what makes
Yeah.
him a fascinating character is that he is those two, separate things. And to see that there are different, that all of the innies are sort of like that. And it, for a long time, it felt like Mark was the least so. I remember having that debate with myself for a while. I was like, okay, Innie, Helly, and Audi, Helena are two completely different people. Okay, Innie, Dylan, Audi, Dylan, different people. Mark seems to be similar-ish. And then to like sort of get them to go head to head, I was like, oh, they're not. No, they're two different people. Like completely different in ways that you may not expect. Maybe have similar personality quirks, a lot of similarities, share a lot. I think what the show is ultimately saying about identity in the end is that identity is lived experience. That you're nothing really much more than that. Um, and there are other parts of us that maybe seep in, and there's there's nurture and nature and all these things, but at the end of the day, what you've experienced is who you are, and that's how the indies and outies are so different.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts before we move on to ratings?
Sure. I mean, there's so many things about the show to
I
talk
know.
about and get into. I mean, we didn't even hit on the kid. the little girl and like what her deal is.
Oh yeah.
But ultimately, I think what I love about the show is it's a bit has its ability so far to prove that it can expand into many questions and that it has answers that are satisfying and lead to more questions, which is always a challenge with a sci-fi mystery thing. Is it's like once you answer the question, isn't it over? But no, I think the show's done a really good job of okay, here's the answer to this mystery, but doesn't that make you think about this? Like, and I think that's super
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and I think it actually does a really good job of making it not just about the mystery. There's ethical questions
Mm-hmm.
being brought up. The characters are very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so it's more than just the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that said, let's move on to our ratings. And as a reminder, or if you're new here, we rate things on the script coverage scale. That is pass if we think it's not very good, consider uh if we think it's pretty decent, and recommend if we think it is actually really, really good or maybe even great. And as a reminder, this is not a recommendation, it's just a score. So with that said, how would you rate Severance season 2?
Highly recommend. And I would even go far as to go, it's more than a score. It is a recommendation on my part. I think if you haven't watched it, first of all, if you haven't
Yeah.
watched it and now you listen to this whole episode, I don't know, I mean, it's kind of ruined for you now, but go watch it anyway. I don't know why you were ever here, but I'd highly recommend. Honestly, I'd highly recommend just watching it again if you didn't watch
Oh yeah.
if you didn't rewatch season one before season two. Go do that. It's really fun,
Yeah.
and I kind of want to do it
Mhm.
now and watch it all in one big sitting.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I always say, hey, this is not a recommendation, because because I'll say that after we spend like 40 minutes spoiling everything.
Right, right.
That's why I'm like, yeah, it's just a score.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you've already seen the show, or whatever we're
Right.
talking
And if
about.
you're listening to this, you maybe probably already have an opinion on it.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, easy recommend. I'm gonna go so far as to say this is the best show on TV right now. And the way I define that would be like, if there's a show, if it's had a season in the past 2 years, um,
Mm,
that is considered part of right now. And I
yeah.
do think Severance is at that level. It's so interesting. The concept, the way the mysteries are revealed, the filmmaking of it, like cinematography and everything, and the editing is incredible, and just just interesting. It's the one show that I'm constantly thinking about even after the credits have rolled.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you. If anyone were to ask me, like, what's a show you should watch? What's a show? Like, I haven't
Yep.
watched TV in a while. Like, I need to get into a new show. And be like, have you seen Severance? That's probably my first thought, you know?
Yep.
Um,
All right. What else would you recommend to our audience? Something like Severance, or
well, thinking of things that are like Severance, I think my recommendation would be Lost. Thinking of a TV show, thinking of because and why I recommend it. I've been rewatching it with my fiance right now, who she's watching it for the first time, and I think part of the thrill of a show like Severance is that idea of mystery and questions, and like whether those are ethical questions or like a greater mystery or like character dynamics that grow and change, and there's such a specific moment, and it's sci-fi and thriller and all these elements, and there's always new questions coming up. And I think
yeah,
Lost doesn't maybe do what part of what I love about Severance is Severance does better than Lost in the sense of like it seems to have all the answers already and know where it's going.
yeah,
Lost, I don't think Lost always does, but it's cool to it's. I recommend it because we were talking earlier about like how in this era of TV we can and with streaming and stuff you're able to plan things out differently. It's cool to see Lost in a sense to keep that in mind if they weren't doing that. They were writing things
yeah.
a little bit more on the fly, a little
I
bit
mean, they had to.
yeah different network
Yeah.
constraints, not knowing they're going to get a new season. So
Hmm.
it's different, but it's gets that same thrill of like if you like Severance and you haven't seen Lost, go watch Lost because you'll have that same thrill of like I gotta watch the next one and I gotta talk to somebody about this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, constraints. I mean, I think they were still under the 20 something
Mm,
episodes. a season, one season a year. I mean, we had 3 years between Severance seasons one
Yeah,
and two, and there were 8 episodes
totally.
each, I believe.
That's also a show. Speaking of something we were talking about earlier, and I don't know if you've seen Lost. Um, it's also a show that most of the episodes, or at least in the first season, are focused on one character, and they'll tell their backstory while
Hmm.
telling another story on the
Yeah.
side, and that does that really well.
Yep. Um, yeah, so I am gonna recommend Legion. This is a show that is on FX. It's actually technically Marvel, because it is an X-Men character, um, although it doesn't really make many references. I mean, there's a bit of Easter eggs, but you don't have to have seen anything else in Marvel uh, to watch Legion. And I recommend it because it is also sci-fi, and I want to say some of the style of it is familiar, like just the visuals of it, and it does get like super like mystery box and trippy and all that. I think um, to a degree, I don't know if I've ever seen any show uh, at that level, but I think it's something that if you enjoy Severance, I think you will also enjoy Legion.
Yeah, kind of also deals with those similar themes we were talking about of like identity, right? And like, um, like because he's multiple personalities, multiple people, and like, are you all one?
Yeah.
Are you many things? Like, do they have their own lives? Like, yeah, deals with similar ethical and thematic questions, which is cool.
Mhm. And what else have you been watching?
What else am I watching? Oh, I just finished this show on Netflix. Have you seen Adolescence?
No, I have
It
not.
is so good. I think that's probably like one
Okay.
of the best things I've seen in a while. I know I was just saying about that about Severance, but
Really?
Adolescence is a miniseries. It's only 4 parts. It might be my favorite thing I've seen because it's like in a long time because it's so. First of all, it's shot. Every episode is one shot. I don't know if you know that about it.
I did
It's
not. That is super
yeah.
impressive.
Every episode is one continuous shot. Um, and it's really compelling, and the acting is amazing, and the way they do it, like you'd think like it would be stressful. How are they going to do this? But like episode 3 all takes place in just one location, and it's the one episode that like I didn't ever like look at my phone. Like I was like fully glued to the screen. And it's a
All
crime
right.
show. It's a little intense. A crime show involves kids, but it's like the way that it treats a murder mystery is very unique, and the ultimate like reveal and answer of things is very it hits really home to anybody who watches the news and like is aware of just like crimes that get committed and why, and it's a very important issue that it's talking about in terms of
Okay.
like toxic
Yeah, I gotta
masculinity.
check it out.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I gotta check it out. Yeah. I I actually just finished the newest season of Harley Quinn.
Oh, nice. How was
Very, very
that?
different show. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of fun. I'm actually not a big fan of the adult animated comedies.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really my genre, but I think Harley Quinn um does stand out to me. Because I'm not saying it's the only one that does this. There are definitely others, but it's one of the only ones where with the crazy raunchy humor, I think it's also delivering on character and story. And this season, particularly towards the end, brings up some interesting. We talked about it with Severance, some philosophical
Okay, yeah.
questions. And I this is not something I expected from Harley Quinn, but it does bring it up, and I think it handles it um quite well. So yeah, I mean, I would recommend that, especially if you are kind of a DC fan or even a comic book fan in general.
Yeah, I'm like really glad to hear you say that because I watched the first few seasons and it felt very similarly that I was like, there's a lot going on here that's deeper and philosophical, and if you're a DC fan, there's a lot to it. And then towards the end of last season, started to feel a little bit like, ugh, this is just another raunchy comedy. So to know that like,
Yeah.
to know that the new season seems to continue with what works really well with the show is really cool.
Yeah, I wasn't too big on last season.
Mm-hmm.
I do think this season is a big, big improvement on it.
Great, well that convinces me I'll watch it.
That's it for this episode of the Pages of Pixels podcast. I'm Roland.
I'm Drew.
And before we head out, Drew, why don't you just tell everyone where they can find you, or what have you been up to? What
Yeah,
are you doing?
sure.
Anything exciting coming up?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Instagram, Drew Made Mint. uh, there I'm posting mainly about the shows that I'm doing right now. I'm in a show called the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. It's playing from now until April 6th every weekend at the Wisteria Theater in North Hollywood. It's a new theater. You can get tickets online. Find me on Instagram. Find the link there. Come check it out. And then this summer, I'm playing Lord Farquaad in Shrek the Musical at the Nocturne
Oh,
Theater
that's
in Glendale.
awesome.
Yeah, so I got two shows coming up. Come check me out. I like to be silly and dance around and be funny and sing and do cool stuff like that. So come check it out if you're in the area and want to see a fun show. They're really good shows, and the people in them are super talented. So come support live local theater.
It's awesome. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, man. That was fun.